we had yet another instance of injustice in the African American community, where first we were marching just for indictments. We were like, we need to indict Zimmerman. We just need to get an arrest in this case. So we started actually arresting people after they shoot black people, which is all good. Then we wanted to fight for actual prosecution. Well, we want these people prosecuted. And so we got prosecution of the Freddie Gray case. We got prosecution Walter Scott. We got prosecution in Philando Castile. But now we want convictions. And people have a hard time understanding how we're not getting convictions in cases like this. So that's why we brought in our Lawyers Roundtable, former prosecutor, defense attorney, Mr. Kirby Clements, and also a criminal defense attorney, advocate, attorney, the Justicefighter, Mr. Gerald Griggs. Fellas, how are you today?
I'm doing great, brother.
All right, I'm going to go to Gerald first because you've been patiently waiting and hanging out in the studio with us for the last hour. How is it we're not able to get convictions in cases like this?
Well, I mean, several issues. One is the makeup of the jury, but more importantly is the jury instructions that are being given. If you're given in such a way, you can get a certain outcome. And so we need to start addressing the systemic issues of underrepresentation on juries by African Americans or by people of color. And we need to start taking a hard look at the actual instructions that are being given by jurors, given to jurors by the judge. I had an occasion to speak to several of the attorneys up there in Minnesota on the Philando Castile verdict, and the composition was 10-2, white to black. And they said they had some serious concerns about the instructions that were given. If you know that what the judge is telling the jury and it has the color of law because it's the judge, you're going to lean in that direction and ultimately you're going to get a result. So we need to start taking a strong look at that, and we need to actually start serving on jurors. Juries, stop trying to get out of jury service by, saying you can't be fair or saying, that you've already made previous vacation plans or you just don't want to serve. We need to actually participate in jury service and hold the system accountable.
Now, Kirby, you're a former prosecutor, and you know that the system is rigged in favor of the prosecution. Like when you walk into that courtroom, the judge and the district attorney are usually chummy and best friends. Everything it's set up for you to get convicted. So how is it we're not getting convictions in these cases?
Well, I'll say this. I think that a couple of things. One, I tried a cop once, and I convicted the officer. I think it's also in how you go about trying them. You can't have them be officer so-and-so who made a bad decision, because if you do that, you're going to lose already. You have to de-police them. You have to be, this is John Q. Public who did this thing that was criminal, and he was wearing a police uniform. Take that police aura away from him. Also, when it comes down to shootings, the reality is this. It's about reasonable. And the problem that we face in a police shooting case is that reasonable behavior, and something I posted on my Facebook account, is reasonable starts right next to unreasonable, encompasses wrong, and may also include right. So you can be totally factually wrong in what you did, and it can be almost unreasonable. But if it's reasonable, and that's the part of the jury charge the court instructs jurors on as to whether a person was in reasonable belief or reasonable fear, if that reasonable is in there, you're going to lose. And so that's the component. And I talked with a police officer, former classmate of mine, because we were having a debate on Facebook, and he said, call me. So I talked to him, and we went through this shooting and some of the concerns that he had about the shooting. But I also ultimately concluded that when the issue is reasonable, what we have to understand is reasonable can also include wrong. And that's the problem.
And so, Gerald, on that point of reasonableness, it's almost as if, we learned a reasonable person standard in law school. We learned, but there's no finite definition of it. It really is just the mind of a fair-minded juror on a fair day or some crap like that we wasted $100,000 to learn. What do we have to do from a community perspective to break this idea that it's always reasonable to shoot black people?
We have to change the mindset of the person who's viewing it from that reasonable person standard, because reasonable is different based on your experience, your life experience. For me, it's unreasonable to shoot a man who's sitting in a car with his fiance and his 4-year-old simply because he told you that he was licensed to carry and he had a gun. That's unreasonable. But I don't come from where this officer came from, and I definitely don't come from where the jurors who made the decision come from. I come from a community that's been oppressed. I come from a community that's been over-policed and that's been, underrepresented for so many years. And so in order to get reasonable person standard for a community like mine, we have to have people that have that common experience. And we also have to have prosecutors who are willing to take that chance. I applaud a lot of the prosecutors now who are actually proceeding with these cases, but we need to bring more of the cases. We need for them to argue with the same level of fervor and zeal that they do every single day with mass incarceration and black people that are being sent to prison. Because just like you and I've been in a case where they had one witness who you could tell was lying, and that person got convicted for something far less. So I think that's where we have to go. We have to make sure that we are represented by the system and force the system to work appropriately.
And speaking of, before we don't address the point, I want you to talk about the pack in the courtroom you're doing this week.
Yes, in another case, the Jesse Murray is happening. It happened in Clayton County in 2014, and we tried to apply stand your ground last year, and the judge decided stand your ground didn't apply. But it's a case where a young man was in a bar with his wife. Four inebriated individuals who happened to be white approached him. There was a verbal altercation. They put their hands on him. They beat him severely. He was able to escape, got out of the bar, went back to his car, retrieved his weapon, which he was licensed to carry, and went back, attempted to go back into the bar to get his wife. Before he was able to make it through, he was assaulted again, and there was a physical altercation. The gun accidentally went off. The individual who turned out to be an off-duty police officer was killed. Several of the other individuals who were with that off-duty police officer fired 4 shots at him and actually struck him, physically assaulted him while the police were there, and now he faces murder charges. So we want the entire community to come out in Clayton County tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, courtroom 406, which is Judge Collier, and send a message the entire trial by being present that we will not stand for the application of the law to be biased based on color. Here's a case where he clearly was standing his ground. He clearly had a right to defend himself and his wife, and now he's facing murder charges, and nobody else is facing any charges.
You know, it's interesting. I remember back in 2012 when we sued the state with Rainbow Push to overturn the state stand your ground law. That was the basis of the suit, that the law is not evenly applied to African Americans. There's a absolute right to self-defense for white people, and there's no right to self-defense for black people. Read as the text reads, the stand your ground law would make it legal to have any gang shootout. Because if somebody's shooting at you, you reasonably are in fear that they might be trying to kill you, and you can shoot back. It's a completely idiotically written law, but we couldn't get a single Democratic state lawmaker to support us on that legislation. And when we get back, I want to talk about this idea of legislating changes that will make it easier to prosecute some of these cops and make it easier to get justice in these cases. We'll be back with Kirby Clements and also Gerald Griggs after the break. Call in 404-892-2703.